My name is Thaddeus. We're going to jump right in to Luke, and just an awesome thing to have the scripture read. We're going to be in Luke 8, chapter 8, verse 22, and not really working our way through it again because those four readings paint four major miracles that Jesus does right after he calls the disciples to follow him. I think one of the things that I really want to point out that actually wasn't my go-to. My go-to is like pointing out all of the cool things in the text. Like my daughter got to read the first story of them being on the water and the fact that we don't have time to get into this, but Jesus is sleeping on the cushion that you would steer the boat from. Like he's leading them into this storm, and with a word, he calms it. Or when it gets across to the other side, which is a Gentile place, he sends demons not into the abyss, like question, why don't you do that? Sends them into pigs, which for Gentiles, a Jewish person doing that, been like, we don't eat pigs, we don't touch them, so we're going to mess up your pigs. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. Even when it comes to the daughter, this is the thing that jumped out to me that we don't get to get into, but maybe you like to study the Bible. Did you notice how old the daughter was and how long the woman had been bleeding? Same years. She was 12, about to become a woman in first century society. The bleeding woman had been an outcast. Nobody would touch her or look at her for the same amount of time this almost dying girl would have been alive. I found, though, that these four miracles do something really important for us. Because if Jesus is calling these 12 and maybe a few others to walk really closely with him, they probably have questions in their mind like, what is it going to be like? What kind of stuff are we going to do? And I think for many of us, they were asking a similar question: is this life following Jesus better than life before? And in particular, these four things go into the fact that is it easier? And Jesus is going to say through these four miracles, and I believe he wants to say that to us, hey, you're experiencing the kingdom of God. Imagine what the disciples got to see with their own eyes. They got to see him speak to a storm and it stop. But he's reminding them that they're in a world that the kingdom isn't fully come, full of people that are hurting and affected by the evils of sin and sickness all throughout. And the question for them is, how will you confront it? What will you do when tribulation comes your way? How will you help when other people experience tribulation? That's what these four things are that we're going to look at, is tribulation. I've given you a great alliteration for tribulation. That rhymed too. There are four, and they are disaster, demons, disease, and death. As a category, disaster, demons, diseases, and death, all four things that we will face. The first thing, though, that I want to point out is, are tribulations in the Christian life possible? And you might roll your eyes at me because that's a silly question. So our first point could say the possibility of tribulations, that they may come. But anybody who's lived here, and I know so many of your stories, and I want to say this: thank you for trusting me authentically with your story. Getting to talk with you and you saying, I'm going through this and it's really hard, is a gift that I don't know how to say thank you enough for. So when we look at tribulations, are they possible? You would say yes. The next one, we could say, are tribulations inevitable? If you're a person, will you have some form of tribulation, even using those four categories? Will you experience disaster? Will you experience a demon, whether it's an actual demon or a mental illness and disorder? Will you experience a disease? Will you experience death? Well, all of this, at least the last one, right? So we could say it's possible, we could say that it's inevitable, but the premise of this story that Jesus is literally leading his disciples through is that it's not just that they're possible, nor that they're inevitable. Luke chapter 9, verse 22 says this: the Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. They aren't just possible, they aren't just inevitable, they are necessary. Paul will say later in Acts 14, verse 22, we must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. Jesus called the 12. They're not exempt from life. He's saying you're experiencing the kingdom. Salvation is happening, but the world remains permeated, inundated, filled with all sorts of evil. How will you confront it? So the second point, if they're necessary, is how then do you confront it? What do you do when that strikes? First question, you can talk to me here. What role did the disciples play in these 4 tribulations? You heard Rosie read, if you weren't here yet, because a lot of you weren't here yet, you were very late to church. She read about the storm. And then we had Sarah Baker, not Markham. Sarah Baker read about the demon-possessed man, and then Barb and Joe read about the daughter and the bleeding woman. What role did the disciples play? They were there. Anybody see what they did? It wasn't noticeable, that's for a fact. You can talk to me here. They complained. We're just like the disciples. I mean, I went through it a lot because I asked the question, like, what was their role? First, in the storm, the best thing that they did is they screamed for help. Verse 24, if you have chapter 8 out, look at verse 24. That's the one time that they speak in this miracle. Master, Master, we're going to drown. That's it. In the next miracle, what do? They are unmentioned, silent, passive observers. They're there because they were in the boat with Jesus. They don't say or do a thing, they just watch. In the third miracle, if we're looking at the bleeding woman, they are both confused and then masters of the obvious. You ever heard somebody call you a master of the obvious? Like, thanks a lot for that. What do they do in that miracle? It's in verse 45 if you go down, or maybe you have to flip over. Jesus says, who touched me? They all deny it. Like, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. Are they in trouble? And then Peter, our boy Peter says, master of the obvious, right? Master, the people are crowding around you and pressing against you. Be like, thanks, Peter. It's really helpful. The last is death. What do the disciples do? They're in the room, silent, invited, but flies on the wall. So the obvious next question is, who is it that confronts evil and tribulation? Who is it who actually conquers evil and tribulation? Jesus. It's the answer. All the kids in the room would know it, right? God. That it's a crazy thing to think about if we're going to look at the necessity of tribulation, that it is necessary for you to go through tribulation. And we'll get to why it is in a minute. Is how do we conquer tribulation? How do you make it in tribulation is look at Jesus. And it's helpful if we look at it from their lens, but in 3 different times possibly. The first I want you to think about is Jesus is the king of right now. He's king right now. Many of you might be in tribulation in this moment. He's king right now. I think for us, if we want to be people who are going to be able to confront and conquer and deal with tribulations both in our lives and other people, we need to be with Jesus and realize He's right now. He's here with us. But there's a difference when we read their story, because I just alluded to it. They got to see and hear Him speak over the storm. They got to see the bleeding woman confessing in front of the entire crowd. They got to hear Jesus call her daughter. A few of them got to be in the room. As He tells everybody knows this dead, sick girl, get up, and she gets up. For us, it was with their physical eyes. For them, it was with their physical eyes. For us, friends, the way that we will be able to conquer and face the tribulations of our life is to be able to think about it with our spiritual eyes. We don't get to see him physically. We don't get to hear his voice like they did. And it's twofold when you think about your spiritual pursuit of Jesus. One is an individual. The scriptures in Hebrews 11, verse 6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. If you are in tribulation, if you are in life's life, our invitation here is to believe in faith and earnestly seek him. But you're not just alone, because we also do it together. Matthew 18:20 is the famous where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them. So the invitation is pursue Christ personally and gather together with your blood-bought brothers and sisters and let them encourage you and carry you and walk with you through those trials. The prerequisite to confronting tribulation, to conquering tribulation, is that you can't do it, Jesus can. Be with him. Don't ask him to be with you. Be like, Jesus is what I'm doing. Come join me. You need to do everything you can to be with him. So first, be with him because he's the king of right now. He's in charge right now, but he's also the king of way back when. That's what I'm calling it. Does anybody know how long way back when is? Long time? So there's a good tip. I have little kids. If you ever have little kids and you're like, I used to have little kids, but now they're gone. They moved out, and I'm like, I wait for that day sometimes. The best way to beat anybody in this conversation is just to say +1 to whatever you say. So my kids start to say high numbers, and they're like, well, 1,000, and then Lincoln, he just makes up numbers right now. 1 billion, trillion, bajillion. And then they all go more and more, and they're like infinity. And I just chime in because I'm learning. I was like, whatever all of you say, +1. And then Rosie, who's relatively smart, is like, +1 to what you said. And I'm like, I'm already +1 you. She's like, well, +1 to that. I'm like, I'm already +1. Whoever says it first wins every time. So however long you think Jesus is the king of right now and he's the king of way back when, however long you might picture +1. It goes further back. The scriptures tell us that it's eternity past. We don't know. How does that have anything to do with tribulations? Because way back when, +1, he knew that that was going to happen. You can believe whatever you want about predestination or free will. Did he force them to do it? Wherever you are on that, I know that he knew. He knew that morning when he said, hey, let's go to the other side of the lake, that there'd be a demon-possessed man who has a legion of demons in him that would come running and screaming at the top of his lungs, what do you want with me? And he knew the disciples would stand there and say nothing. He also knew on the way there that he would take a nap controlling the boat, and the disciples would freak out because sailors encountering a storm that they had never seen before. He knew it from way back when. He knew that this woman would have a bleeding issue that would isolate her from friends and family and all society. If you had a bleeding problem like this woman, you read any commentary, she couldn't touch anybody, she couldn't be near anyone for more than 10 years. He knew that she would get the disease. He knew that she would be bold and brazen to go into a crowd and try and touch him. He knew that he would get a time to talk with her in front of everybody. He also knew about Jairus' daughter. Way back when. He is the king of right now, and he's the king of way back when. And what we have to understand, how much ever you might be frustrated or angry or furious or confused at the situation that you're in, many of these tribulations that life throws at us are a consequence of sin entering the world. Some of it you've done, some of it others have done. And as much as you might be angry at it, I need you to know that God is furious at the effects of sin in his beautiful and perfectly created world. He is actively working to fix them, but sometimes it's not in the moment. So if we're going to confront disease and demons and disasters and death, we have to realize he's the king of right now and he's the king of way back when, but he's also The last one is the King of coming soon. We all know the scripture. Romans 8:28 says, in all things, all the good things, all the bad things, all the painfully hard things, all the scenarios in your life that you're walking through, you go, I don't understand how God can let this happen. All the things that you go through and you go, God, it could have been anybody, it could have been me, but not them. All of those situations, He is working for your good if you're loving Him. He has great plans in store for you. Consider the story of the early church within tribulation. These disciples are called, Jesus leads them into the storm, but then think about after the fact. What happens to the early church? Are they exempt from pain and life and hardship? If you think about those four categories, actually where demon possession is concerned, it seems like almost every case which it's mentioned, it's also cured. But when it comes to illness, disease, there were notable cases where there wasn't a miraculous healing. Think about Paul talking about his thorn in the flesh, or even, was it Timothy that he said, drink a little wine because of your constant illness. Another person came up, Trophimus, in 2 Timothy 4, was ill. So a lot of times in the New Testament, people aren't cured of diseases just because they get one. You think about the dead, apart from a few people, all of the first century Christians died. You think about disease or disaster. The only other storm mentioned in the New Testament I found this interesting is Paul in Acts. And he's in a storm for 2 weeks and it ends up shipwrecking them and he almost dies. It plays out to the very end when no hope is to be found. The point that we must see and know and live faithfully in is this: the King of coming soon may not save from tribulation in the way that you expect. That all things work together for my good might not be your definition of good, but it is for your good. He will save. I love, I'm reading the Jesus Storybook Bible again with Lincoln. Because friends, He will save because He's powerful enough, right? He will save because He knows everything. He will save because He cares. I need to share this with you because it just moved me so much. I was reading and it actually was The Storm. You can look it up. It's called Captain of the Storm. It just does a great job of painting a picture for kids to understand. And Bill, you mentioned the Abraham and Isaac moment. They have that one in the Jesus Storybook Bible. And every time I tell it, I raise up my hand and I'm like, he's going to sacrifice him. And the kids are like, no, 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 no. I'm like, it's about it. And I was like, stop. They're like, listen to what it says about the storm. Jesus stood up and spoke to the storm. Hush, He said. That's all. And the strangest thing happened. The wind and the waves recognized Jesus' voice. They had heard it before, of course. It was the same voice that made them in the very beginning. They listened to Jesus and they did what He said. Immediately the wind stopped, the water calmed down. It glittered innocently in the moonlight and lapped quietly against the side of the boat, as if nothing had happened. He's the King of right now, He's the King of way back when, and He's the King of coming soon. But can you recognize His voice? In the middle of whatever tribulation that you are in, can you recognize His voice? So we have the necessity. It's just biblical. Jesus says it. You're going to have tribulation. It's good for you, even though it doesn't feel good. We then have the way to conquer tribulation, and the answer is Jesus, 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 Jesus. The question for me all the time is, so what? So what do we do with this? I see that it's necessary and I see that Jesus conquers it, but are tribulations just pointless? It's just a way for Jesus to flex his supernatural power? Is it just a simple consequence that we have to deal with? But could there be a purpose? What are tribulations for? They're necessary, and there's a way to confront them and conquer them, but what is the purpose of tribulations? And this is so important to see. The purpose of tribulation is witness, it's faith, and it's Christ-likeness. Witness. You get to witness the power and authority that Jesus has over every single tribulation, every facet of life. He is the King of right now. The purpose is that you get to see him act as King of right now. You get to worship him for all of the things that he's done, particularly if you're in the room and you've made it past a hard tribulation. You can see the ways that he's worked. It's not just witness, it's also faith, because faith, as you trust that he was the King of way back when and he knew it would happen, and you go, God, I know that you knew it would happen, and I'm going to continue to pursue you. But it's also faith that you see that he does conquer, and he conquers in a way that maybe you never would have thought. Whether it's one of those passages that when you read immeasurably more than all that we ask, and you go, I literally couldn't measure or ask what you did, God, in this situation. This builds your faith. This is what tribulations do. They let you witness his power. They let you build your faith in him, and then they also make you like Christ. The scripture talks about us having to share in his sufferings. What does that do? If I did a show of hands in the room, not if you work for the government, but I don't want to do this because I know some of you don't share your life. But if there was a show of hands and I said, how many of you have dealt with cancer? I'm sure a bunch of hands might go up. And for all of you that have dealt with cancer, now that you've dealt with it, you understand so much more about suffering. You understand more of what it's like to have cancer. So sometimes you read a story about someone that gets cancer, but you've never had cancer, and you go, man, that must be really hard. And then you go through it, and you go, I know how hard it must be. I think about it before I had kids, and people would always talk to me about how great kids were, and then they would be like, and sometimes they're on the opposite end of the great spectrum. And I go, yeah, whatever. Cool. They're cute. And you're like, yeah, they're cute sometimes, you know. Now I have kids. And I understand what it's like. Friends, you know that you have a King of all time that was God in heaven, and the scriptures tell us that he left that to condescend to become human. I always think of a toy maker becoming the toy to let it know that it loves them. And he didn't just come down, but then he lived a life that you might live too, of pain and hardship. I was talking to a very close friend the other day about spending time with a friend who's already burnt bridges. Like, I don't know if I want to hang out with them again because they've already stabbed me in the back. And the first thing that came to my mind, which is annoying if you're a pastor and you've already got these like Bible things, is I literally was like, what do you think Jesus would do? And I was like, the thing that came up is Judas. If you've ever been betrayed by someone, you've ever had a close friend that you've loved, you understand a little bit more what it would be to be like Jesus. You become more like Christ. Have you ever had somebody mock you unnecessarily? You've become more like Christ. If you've gone through some hardship where you've lost a family member or someone has left you way before they should have, you know what it is to become more like Christ. This is one of the primary purposes of tribulation. Yes, you witness his power and authority. Yes, your faith builds up and it can grow, but primarily, at least for me, through these tribulations, as long as you stay close with him, you become more like him. There's another benefit. I want to say this before we get to that, though. The thing about disaster and demons and disease and death is that you never would have picked it. no one here who's beyond a cancer diagnosis or in the middle of it would pick it. No one would choose to have a family member. I had a close friend when I was in college pass away in a car accident. Wouldn't choose that. Some of you might be dealing with mental illness or depression or anxiety. You wouldn't be like, yeah, I love this. It's great. I'm picking it today. I'm picking to be depressed today. And even just thinking through those, I know so many of you are in those things. I want you to know that Jesus, who is the king over every king, is here right now. He's here, and he wants to be with you, and he wants you to be with him. I want you to know, too, that he knew. As hurt as you are from whatever the tribulation is, to where you even try and communicate how painful it is, and it doesn't do it justice. Doesn't matter how many people or how much time you spend explaining the pain, it doesn't get to the bottom of it. He understands the depth of that pain. And he knew that it would happen, even if you're angry or confused. He created all of it. And he loves every facet of his creation far more than you ever could. But he still let it happen for a reason. The third thing I want to tell you, if maybe you're in the thick of it right now, is that he's working. He's here. He knew, but he's working. He never stops. He doesn't need naps. He doesn't need to rest. He is at work to this day. He knows what is best for you. And I would just say this too. Think about the way that he works, because there's another big point I want to get to, but I have to say this because I just experienced it. Think about the way that he works. So maybe you're here and you're this random person and you get diagnosed with cancer. Maybe it's not that. Maybe a family member passes away. I'm not trying to be insensitive. Just think of the hardship and the way that he can work through that situation. Have you ever thought about all of the facets that he can work? So our own story, Kristen just had surgery. Seems like a year ago, but it was 3 weeks ago. All of the ways that he worked in us in I would call it now a minor tribulation. If you don't, she had back surgery and she's doing great. But the first thing is that he got to show off his community. You all showed up to pick up our kids, give us meals. We actually had to have somebody, we said, hey, can you not bring us a meal today because we have too much food in our refrigerator. We can't fit any more food. So could you bring it next week, or you don't have to at all? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And the next week, our fridge was full again. So one of the things that he worked in me and Kristen, and he worked in you, is the strength of biblical community. You guys showed up, and it's not just for us, it's for many other people. But you know what else? He was working in this hardship, this tribulation, even though I'm very aware that some of the stuff that you're dealing with is way harder, is that he's working on Kristen. He's working on her trust, on the frustration that her body would have a physical, the way that it's wired that would lead to this happening, the way that there would be such pain that she would have to deal with. And bringing that to God and inviting him to speak into it, but he's also working on me. A lot of the things right away, even when you guys started to sign up for all of our kids, I was like kind of proud, and I was like, good on you, but like I'm a dad, I can handle my kids, and I had to kind of like die to myself. Somebody was like, hey, people want to help you, and I'm like, but I can do it, I'm like, okay. But then he's also revealed stuff about who I am as a husband, who I am as a dad, my responsibilities, and the joy that we can have in a family that maybe I hadn't seen in a while, and the impatience that can come out in me, the selfishness that's there, but also the service and the humility that can be there. He's worked in so many things through one tribulation. Imagine all of the ways that he is working with his infinitely perfect mind and limitless strength in you and in those around you through the tribulation. He's here. He knew. He's working. If anything was clear to me from last Sunday, if you don't remember, we talked about germinating and pollinating. really it's every page of the Bible, though, is that this righteous relationship that I have with God through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is definitely for me, but it's not just for me. So we know we're not free from tribulation. It's necessary. We also know that we aren't helpless in tribulation, are we? Tribulation's going to come, but we know someone who conquers it. We know someone that if you're with them, that they're at work, they can help you make it through these tribulations. And this is what I would pray. I've prayed this week, is that the seed that has been planted in your heart, may it produce. That's what the text said last week. There's a production that happens when the seed is planted in fertile soil. And I would say specifically the seed of confronting tribulation. Not as one free from it, you have it. Not as one helpless in it, you have someone. But as someone who is walking with the King of today and yesterday and forever, may that seed produce faith and Christ-likeness in you, and may you produce and serve as a witness to those around you. Think about the other benefit of you going through tribulations is that every person that you bump into will also go through them, but many of them do not know who the King of every king is. Many of them do not know that there's a God in heaven who came down and died so that they could live. And in the same way that us going through tribulation might give us a witness, you actually serve as a witness to God's goodness when you walk through it. Not as someone who's helpless and go, I don't know what I'm going to do. The whole world's going to crash down. And not as someone who says, I don't have any problems. I just got wrecked. All these people in my family are really sick and some of them are going to die. And it's so good. I'm fine. It's great. You don't brush it like that and you don't paint it this way. You say, it's hard and it's real. But I know someone who is walking with me through it, and it's going to be good soon. That's a witness. You know what that does when they see you? Man, this person took it on the chin. Anybody else would have done this. It plants the seed of faith in their life. Maybe there is something about this God that they talk about. Maybe there is something worth investigating. Maybe I might check it out somewhere or other. I don't know what it might be, but they responded differently when this happened. They are different because it happened. And ultimately, the word of Christ gets planted in their hearts. They come to see that there's not just a God in heaven that's maybe whatever view that they might think of him as, but a God became flesh and dwelt among them, who loves them and died for them and walks with them. I think that's the beauty. What's the purpose of pain? It's the purpose of tribulation. Is that for those around us, our tribulations are as much a witness for them as they are for us. They build our faith as much as they build theirs. They make us Christ-like, and then they become like Christ because they see the seed and they hear the word. I have no clue how to respond. But, what do we do? Part of our church is that we want to give time for you to respond. I'm going to invite the band up. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop talking. Let me pray for us. If you need prayer, there will be people up on the sides that would love to intercede for you. I have the feeling that you know how you want and need to respond this morning. God, we come before you. Would you make yourself known? Would you make yourself present? I have a friend who tells me, let today be today. And that was just what came up, thinking about some of you that are dealing with tribulation. You're in the thick of it. Jesus tells us how to pray, and he says, ask for daily bread. I know even for me, and times that have been challenging, it's like, what about this week and 4 weeks from now and 7 weeks and then 4 years down the road? And Jesus says, daily bread. And maybe right now, that's what you need to be reminded, and that's what you need to ask him for. He says to ask for it. So as we pray right now, could we stand? We're going to worship a little bit. Could we just, however you need to, pray for daily bread? God, I need today. I'm running out of energy. It's not looking up. I don't know how it's going to end, but today. This news crippled me. I don't know all the things that I need to do because of this, but today, God, would you give me the daily bread that I need? God, and when we ask, would you provide?